All right, so just to get us started, thank you for joining us today. We will have participants. Got it. We are recording and we are live streaming this event. Participants will be muted and we encourage you to engage and ask questions through the Zoom chat during the session. We are very excited to have our panel here and to have us get kicked off with a video from Josh Booth talking a little bit about our student and educator well-being fall data. So let's get started on that. Apologize, just have a little. Give me one moment to get that video started for us. All right, here we go. Oh.
Morning. Welcome to the Empower K-12 DC Student and Educator Wellbeing Data Debrief and Bright Spots panel using the Fall 2021-22 data. I want to start by thanking everyone and our educators for coming this morning. These have been some really challenging times, and I hope that you know your hard work has truly made a huge impact on the positive outlook for the next generation of our students. Thank you for everything you do and for hanging in there. Let's start with talking about some of the background and research into why well-being matters and our survey design process. The latest brain science research has revealed that when individuals are subject to intense, frequent, and/or chronic stress, the body reacts by overproducing biochemicals that can impact brain and body development, particularly for growing children, but also for adults. This is why we care deeply about well-being and identifying those sources of stress for our students and educators through the well-being survey. In our design process, we start by taking an inclusive approach of many different student and educator well-being stakeholders and experts. Those are school-based behavioral health specialists, school leaders, teachers. The GW Center for Health and Healthcare in Schools has been really important in this work. We also reach out to parents through advocacy organizations and also utilize restorative justice, student and teacher voice experts like School Talk in this process as well. For each survey administration, we don't start from scratch. There are open source research-based survey tools to pull from like Youth Truth and Panorama that allow for more national comparisons at the item level. Some of the most important well-being questions we ask seasonally to track improvement throughout the year, while others are asked on an annual or one-time basis. The well-being areas that the survey focuses on are physical health, mental health, relationships both with peers and with students and with teachers, sources of stress and resiliency, and some academic questions that can help educators hone in on trouble spots as well as bright spots for overall well-being improvement. Our overall goal for the well-being survey is for it to be used as an improvement tool. And so for that, we make sure that the tool is both relevant, efficient, and reliable. Let's dig into the results. First, about the participation. Our student participation was lower this fall because of survey fatigue concerns. There was the Youth Risk Behavior Survey and at least one other major grant that required students to be surveyed this fall. And so we did have lower participation. This was also our first Educator Wellbeing Survey administration ever. So our sample sizes are fairly small. It's 913 students in grades 3 through 8 from 12 public charter schools, and 145 educators from 8 public charter schools that serve elementary school and middle school. Let's start with the educator results. We find that educators are stressed by the challenges presented in and out of the classroom this fall, more than a typical pre-pandemic fall. This quote from a veteran elementary school teacher encapsulates much of the data on educators. The veteran elementary school teacher says, the amount of time taken and the energy that is taken out of my day all day long to spend on 3 to 4 students is overwhelming. I do not have the time, energy, or skill set to support all the needs presented to me by students every day. We asked educators about whether they were feeling cheerful and in good spirits this fall. Keep in mind the timing of this data. The Delta variant had risen, but Omicron had not yet taken hold in the district. These surveys were mainly taken before Thanksgiving. And even though many educators were not, even then, many educators were not feeling it most or all the time. There was a little more, that was a little more true in school than in their personal lives. The most common sources of stress for our educators included behavioral health of their students, student unfinished learning, and work life balance. We did ask teachers who indicated that they've been at the same school for 3 or more years how this fall compares to falls pre pandemic. They indicated that they are spending significantly more time addressing student social, emotional, and behavioral challenges. And for most of them, they're also spending more time on daily lesson planning and communicating with families. The teacher we quoted was one of many who are struggling. 43% of educators do not feel well equipped to help their students with the trauma, grief, or stress that they are experiencing. And nearly 3 out of every 5 teachers have challenges with proactively addressing their own self care needs. They're also very concerned about their colleagues' well being right now. Nearly 80% or 85% are somewhat or very concerned. In the open response section, we asked educators what the most rewarding and most challenging things about school were this school year are so far. And here are their top answers ordered by most mentioned. So for most rewarding, almost every educator responded positively about being able to see their students in person and building the in-person relationships with their students. Way down the list in terms of mentions would be that they're seeing some fast student growth in reading and in math. That it's great to see their colleagues again, and that some of them are taking those small wins to heart. In terms of what is most challenging for them, student behavior, how far students are behind academically is a challenge to keep up with. They're also finding that staff attendance and substitute coverage is a challenge. Further down the list were their own personal mental health and work life balance. Some of the protocol stuff is a challenge, their own time management, their time in school that's available to them to do planning is a challenge, and also for some of them, administration communication. To get an overall perspective, of educator well-being, we counted the number of favorable responses they had to key questions to craft an overall index score for each survey completer. An example of a favorable response would be that I completely or mostly agree that I proactively address my own self-care needs. We've drawn a line at an index score of 50, which delineates where teachers who are responding favorably to a majority of the questions versus those who are not. 1 in 4 educators are falling below that line, which concerns us about their long-term sustainability in their current role. 6 schools met our in-size requirements at the close of the survey window for bright spot consideration. And the school with the top average educator index score is Center City Trinidad, whose leader, Brandy Tyson, joins us today to talk about her strategies to help support educator well-being. Moving on to the student results. Most students are feeling better about life now that they're back in person, but some students still need additional well-being support. We can see that across the board, like we did with the educator data, we also generated a well-being index score for every student. This chart shows the change in average student well-being index score for returning students at schools that participated in both fall 2020 and fall 2021 surveys. So these are the same cohort of students, and we see that their overall index score has gone up across all student groups. What we do find is still variation amongst the student groups. We see that some of the most vulnerable populations are the ones with further score with lower index scores. First year students, especially in middle school, seem to be struggling. You can also see that about 1 in every 10 elementary school students experienced significant well-being challenges this fall, and in middle school, it was 1 out of every 8 students. You can also see that 2 in every 5 students have an index score at or above 90. Last fall, that was only 1% of all students had an index score that high. So, why are students with low well being index scores struggling? These 4 questions seem to tease it out for us a little bit. When we filter the data for just for those students, we find a few startling trends. First, that half have experienced the loss of an adult or family member that they care about. Note that we do not define the word loss, as research suggests that students feel similar levels of stress, whether that loss is due to someone moving or a family member passing away or other reason for the loss. They don't really feel like they belong at school, they're less likely to see their friends outside of school, and they are often struggling to deal with their stress. We asked students what they like most and least about the school year so far, and here are their top answers. What they like most, they definitely like seeing their friends again in person. They like the teachers, they're very favorable about gym and recess, math or reading, then arts and specials, science and humanities, extracurricular activities in that order. What do they like least? The most frequent response was wearing a mask, but we did see a number of students talk about bullying and fighting in school. I think that this is related to some of the behavioral health challenges that our teachers are talking about. They're also like, they do not like when their whole class gets in trouble for some of them. Math was mentioned most often. I think that that's probably related to the fact that math had the most unfinished learning and that it's been struggle keeping up. And they're also just not favorable of lunchtime and lunch food. The schools with the top average student index scores were Washington U Ying and Friendship Below Pierce. These two schools had top scores for all students who participated in the survey, as well as students who experienced food insecurity or at-risk students as well. Sarah Harris from Washington U Ying and Gregory Spears from Friendship will join us today as well for the panel discussion. So, what are some of the things that we feel like we should be kept in mind as we move forward? What stands out to us as possible next steps is one, that education is a long game. It may help to remind our educators that the last 2 years have led to significant challenges, but for most of our students, we have years to resolve them. So it's probably good to remind them that, like, just do your best with what you can do, right? If we talk about and use terms like that this is a crisis, it could continue to heighten the stress response mechanisms within our educators and our students. We also think that a focus on joy, creativity, and a scientific mindset is important. We were reminded of a lot of the kinds of things that our DC Bold schools were doing pre-pandemic. They focused on joyful relationships and environments, allowed for creative solutions to challenges, and utilized a scientific mindset to better determine what worked and what didn't to continuously improve faster. And lastly, collaboration and promising practice sharing. Today we'll hear some great and promising strategies from our panelists and audience members. Feel free to use them. And join us for future well-being surveys to continue sharing data in the spirit of collaborative improvement. As we think about well-being and improving it, this graphic from Turnaround for Children is pretty important. It shows you from the base what kinds of things do students need to have as a base in order to get to that self-determination, curiosity, those higher order levels of well-being. We also think that balancing the art and science of education helps improve quickly. These are the things that are what our bold schools do. When we think of art of teaching, we're talking about connecting and inspiring students, having a deep pedagogical knowledge, um, building family relationships, creatively collaborating. And then when we think of the science of education, it's really like thinking deeply about the root causes of the challenges that we have, collecting valid and reliable data, looking at it frequently, and collaborating strategically. So what's next for us? Join our winter survey. The survey window will run from February 14th through March 11th. You can reach out directly to me, jboots at empowerk12.org, or just monitor the OSCE and PCSB weekly comms emails for more information. And I will turn it over to Rachel. Rachel Sadlin is the Associate Director of Research and Education at the GW Center for Health and Healthcare in Schools. And she's also an active leader of the DC school-based behavioral health community of practice. Rachel will be facilitating our discussion this morning. Rachel, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Josh, for that overview of the data. I'm going to kind of segue us into the facilitated conversation. And I just want to thank SBOE members for joining us today, as well as all of the other individuals that have joined us. And also let you know that Rachel sadly wasn't able to make it. And so Olga Acostia-Price, the Associate Director at the Milken Institute School of Public Health and Director of the Center for Health and Healthcare in Schools at GW, will be facilitating this conversation for us. So thank you, Olga, and thank you for everyone on the panel.
So wonderful to be with you all today. I'm sorry that Rachel's under the weather, as many of our friends and colleagues and family members are, but she and I are so pleased to be a part of this work. As was said, I'm an associate professor at GW, and I direct the Center for Health and Healthcare in Schools, and we've been very deeply committed to the work of behavioral health and well-being in the District of Columbia, and are so honored to introduce this esteemed panel of school leaders who will really share how they have utilized, I think, this really important feedback and the voice of young people and their educators to really drive some strategies at the school level. First, we welcome Sarah Harris, who is the assistant principal of Washington Union Public Charter School. So pleased to have her here. Also, Gregory Spears, who's the principal of Friendship Blow Pierce Elementary Public Charter School. Thank you, Gregory, for joining. And last but not least, Brandy Tyson, who's principal of Center City Trinidad Public Charter School. So I'm so pleased to just start off our discussion a bit. And I'd like to start off with Brandy. If you could, just for a few minutes, tell us what value did you and your team get from administering the well-being survey? Curious what went into your decision to invest the time to actually do the survey and the data that was shared by Empower K-12. Can you share a little bit about that?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I think one of the things that we first acknowledged is that we were really excited about being able to use the same tool, to kind of get voices from teachers and students, because that doesn't happen that often. Usually you're giving students one tool to collect data, and we're using something like Insight or something else to collect data from staff members. So it was really good to get to utilize just one tool. It also allowed us to really align the quantitative and qualitative data. Like we're there and we kind of see it. But to hear students and to see how they kind of quantify their experiences alongside the staff, I think was really, really powerful for us. It was a great pulse check, just to kind of see where we are with our stakeholders and how everyone was feeling, and pleasantly surprised, to be very honest with you.
That's excellent. Thank you. Those are really great points. Gregory, would you add anything else to that? Were there some other reasons that you all decided to administer the survey in addition to what Brandy shared?
Sure. To us, the survey was important because, in this new landscape we find ourselves in, we have to start looking at new or alternative data points outside of what we've traditionally looked at. So we can truly know how we can recover and improve. But that being said, the value that we found really terms of teachers, showed how the distribution of stressors was impacting staff well-being. We find that a lot of our teachers are taking on the stresses and trauma of others, their students, their colleagues. It also allowed us to re-examine how, why, and when, certain roles and responsibilities could be reallocated, supported, or reimagined based on the new normal. We've said all along over the past year or so, we can't recreate what we had, we have to create something that's new. And so in looking at that and considering that when looking at the data as it relates to students, the value, we found the students are happy to be back. But, the shock of what back means now has shifted. And so, dynamics have changed, over the course of the last 2 years, dynamics in the households have changed outside of school, whether it's the amount of time that people are spending together now, loss of family members, loss of income, physical changes and developments for our students, things that they went through. So, while students are happy to be back, those dynamics with friends, teachers, and staff have changed. So really for us over on the sunny side of Ward 7, the value was in, some spaces confirming what we thought we were doing. And then in others, just providing some more insight into what, we didn't anticipate and as a need coming back. So now we can address it.
Also, some very excellent points. Thank you. Right. In this ever shifting context, important to have these snapshots, and I'm glad you find that valuable. Sarah, I wonder if I saw you, shaking your head and really agreeing to both panelists already. I wonder what else you saw from your vantage point.
Yes, I would definitely echo what Gregory and Brandy shared for sure. In addition, I think what really was helpful for us was to pull back at that point in the fall and refocus on social emotional well-being. So, we had a big focus when we kicked off the year. And then, of course, we got absorbed into all the things, in addition to all the COVID challenges, curricular challenges and development that we would always be engaging in. And so to be able to get those survey results at the point that we did, and to really spend time in our team meetings looking over them and focusing on the needs for our students, especially, that was very valuable. It really helped us to pinpoint students who were very quiet in class and maybe hadn't shared some of the trauma that they had experienced, but we were able to then have one-on-one discussions with them and really just show them that we were there, and then come up with some ways to support students as well at that point.
Terrific. I really love everything that you're saying. I'm going to pivot a little bit and ask Gregory to start us off. So if we could dig more specifically into the data for each of your schools. Could you tell us a little bit about what was surprising to you from the data? What did you learn from your survey results and from hearing from others? Also about how to interpret the data. So we get data, we get information, but the other step is really understanding what it means. And so we'd love to hear, what was surprising that maybe you wouldn't have gotten just sort of from your observations or anecdotally, or maybe confirming, as you said, some things that you already had anticipated, and then how you used others to interpret the information. Gregory, we'll start with you.
Sure. So, in terms of surprising, we've really tried to embrace an approach of, at this point, not being surprised at anything, really, especially data at this point, right? So, the data, in terms of surprise, it is what it is. So what does it say? And then what do we need to do going forward, right? So, what we learned, however, is that our students, for our students, school, virtual or in person, is a critical support, not just for the social emotional, components, but for some really key structural needs. Again, it's not surprising for us, as historically we're a campus that serves, in the mid 70s in terms of at-risk student population. So, when you look at the results, however, for outside of school questions in the survey, going all the way back to last fall, to last winter, and into this year, we tend to see other campuses' percentages increase favorable responses to questions regarding, do you have enough food for you and your family? Do you have a permanent or stable place to live? Or, how often do you eat healthy meals? other campuses are kind of trending in that positive direction where ours are not, they're not changing. As opposed to when you start to look at some of the other in-school questions and components, we seem to be really effective in supporting the social emotional needs of scholars, at the school experience, but based on those responses, the stressors that exist, in that part of their lives are still there. So what do we do as a school community to reach and support beyond our brick and mortar spaces? So, first, because our scholars have to be in both spaces, in and out of school, we look at, what if any progress can we make on the school-based or related needs domain, while encouraging, they could be hindered or even stunted in some areas by what our scholars experience outside of the school. So, which is reason number 962, right? Why it's so critical that we continue to remain open for students and families, and why really we as a campus have been so intentional with how, why, and when we use our time and resources to, throughout the school day, do any and everything within our locus of control, which is a key phrase that we've really used this year, while we have our students, and to constantly evaluate and reevaluate how effective we are being and how we can push to extend, that locus of control and support, from beyond our doors and out into when our students, leave us at the end of each day.
Terrific. Thank you for that. Sarah, would you share from your perspective what you learned from your particular data, and who was important to hear from in terms of understanding what the data means?
Sure. I would say maybe not surprising, but it was very affirming, I think, for our staff to see how many students did feel supported in school, and how many students reported that they had a trusted faculty member who they could go to in times of need. And again, in this very uncertain year, I think for teachers to see that, and to see that their efforts at establishing relationships in the first part of the year, and really setting up some great practices for sharing personal culture and experiences within the classroom had really paid off, and that students really did feel supported. So that was a great thing to see. I think the most surprising thing for our teams was to see that so many students reported the loss of a family member. And as Josh said, that had a wide interpretation, but they still felt that loss. So whether it was, for one reason or another, it really didn't matter. They felt that loss and being cut off. And I think at our school in particular, because over half our staff members are from China and other Chinese-speaking countries, they are also cut off from family, the majority of them right now, and have been for the last 2 years. And it's really hard. But I think that for our teams to see that, and then to connect with students in that way was really important. So it just helped us to pinpoint some support that we needed to provide, and really to reach out to certain students as well, and make sure we were doing that.
Thank you. Brandy, eager to hear also from you in Center City and what the data showed you all. And I think you're muted. There.
Sorry about that. I think one of the big ahas that we kind of walked away with, that we were really excited about, I think to Gregory's point earlier, Center City Trinidad was a very low tier 2 school when I started there in 2018. And so one of the things that we push consistently from that point and currently is like student ownership, students really owning, their learning. And so we were so excited to see a lot of the open-ended responses from students. They were disappointed that they had not been able to take part the last 2 years because they really wanted to show what they had learned. And they have been really proud of, the academic success and how they've been getting, all of the support from teachers, leaders, and we bring in a lot of external partnerships because we really believe in exploration and experiential learning and how that like ties into all of the overarching like academic outcomes. So we were pleasantly surprised by that, but also very excited that they're like, man, we're bummed that we haven't been able to take our test at the end of the year to kind of show the growth. It's almost like they wanted to, that was their way of like, kind of showing teachers appreciation, like we want to show you what you've done for us. And they really talked about that. So they were able to articulate their disappointment, but also articulate what they were learning. And a lot of them talked about, especially the 8th graders, they said that they were just excited that we had not backed off of kind of pushing them. And they called us pressed. That's what they called us. So they said that they were kind of excited that we were still being pressed about showing them what it means to like graduate and have high expectations and try to plan for like future mastery in high school and college. So we were really excited about that.
That is great. I feel so inspired by all of you and all that you've been learning from your communities. I'm sure everyone's really eager to hear also kind of just some specific strategies. So maybe we'll turn there, but just want to remind everyone, if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And in a few minutes, we'll turn to any questions from the audience. So here we'll start with Sarah, and what decisions did you and your team make directly tied to the findings, and what were the results of those actions? What strategies or interventions did you decide to make given that? And again, just to remind us all that always want to celebrate with each other when things go well, but we learn a lot when things don't go well or don't go as expected. That's really also very critical to our learning. So I encourage all of you to also feel free to share when things didn't go maybe as expected and where you had to pivot again. So Sarah, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so we have been trying over the past several years to put more things in place to support social emotional learning. And so I'm going to focus my answers more on students at this point, but really thinking about how we can build and then maintain relationships. And I feel like in coming back this year, there were certain things that we felt very strongly about doing, and so we've put in place. And then other things, like you said, that that we're trying. We're trying, and we're trying to figure out what works. So one of those things that was really great to see was that teachers at 4th and 5th grade, and those are the grades we administered the survey to, they started lunch groups, and that was something that was done by our student liaison in the past, and he does that every day with grades 2 through 5, groups of students, and that's been hugely successful. But after the survey came out, and probably as a result of all kinds of things going on, teachers offered to meet with students in small groups at lunch as well. And that has been really beneficial. So what we've tried to do as an administrative team is to just provide support for them. So for instance, one of our 5th grade teachers was really struggling to connect with some students. And so she wanted to do these lunchtime groups. So we offered to cover her recess duty so that she could still have some time on her own, because we feel that that's a huge component of this too, as I think was mentioned earlier on, is that we're giving so much as educators, and it's wonderful, but at the same time, we're also absorbing much of the trauma that has been going on and then dealing with trauma in our own lives. So that was something that we really wanted to make sure we kept track of, was offering the time to teachers. So when they have said that they want to do things like these small social emotional groups, then we are trying to balance that out and still give them some time in the day for them to, sit in a small room by themselves and eat something and take their mask off and not be with students for, let's say, 20 minutes. So that's been a really great product of this focus on social emotional growth and development. And I would say, Lots of things, really, like I mentioned earlier, focusing during our morning meetings on connection, as we always do, but continuing to do that, and also personal culture, and really helping to keep that at the center of our morning meetings, so that students do have the space to share things that are happening, and teachers too, as appropriate, with students as well.
So great to hear about that. Thank you. Brandy, I'm going to turn to you and curious what you and your teams were able to do based on the survey, and what did you find was working, and maybe you're still trying to find out if it's working.
I think one of the things I think that was really important and kind of vital to the semester is honoring. Our CEO has Wellness Wednesdays embedded into our schedule. And I think not just as a campus, but as a district, that's like vital to sustaining everybody's like emotional space, where teachers are allowed to leave at 1:30, students are dismissed. One of the things that we incorporated, instead of just allowing students to just dismiss, like providing parents with a self-care and wellness plan, opportunities that they can actually maximize on those Wednesdays with their children to kind of help, build a little bit of stamina. We also were not shy of incorporating experiential learning opportunities, like I said earlier, like field experiences, and bringing in field experiences to school, and also making sure that we were honoring our PBS system, our positive behavior incentive system, PBIS system, and making sure that students were being rewarded the same way that we would have rewarded them pre-COVID. And so I think that's important. You want to continue to sustain the positive school culture, understanding that students had been at home for 18 months with little to no access to people and places outside of their home. And so that was important. And I think that it yielded great results. We 0 fights, 0 suspensions. So students were not only excited to be back in the space with, their peers and their teachers, but they felt like they missed so much. So, they wanted to really focus on hearing about everything that had taken place, jumping right back in, to all of the amazing opportunities that we try to provide them bi-weekly and monthly. And then with teachers, they look forward to lots of like culture building, and all types of opportunities to do things outside of school together as a team. And so I didn't shy away from that for COVID. I would allow folks to go get COVID tested to make sure that we were safe. Keep your mask on. Depending on, what the space, if we're outdoors and there are, this restrictions are a little, less stringent, but not taking away those opportunities to make people more fearful of COVID, just kind of giving them some sense of normalcy and trying to get them to relax.
Yes, so important. Thank you. And certainly, Gregory, eager to hear what you all were able to do, what kind of strategies and interventions you felt kind of were directed by what you learned from your data.
Yep. So, Sarah and Brandy, first great points. I think in both of what you shared, it's evident that it's a truth. Relationships are, always have been, and always will be the linchpin to successful schools. And it sounds like you all are really doing some great things to make sure that those remain tight. So for us, however, interestingly enough, scheduling was a big priority for us when we looked at the data and looked at what the needs were for students. How much time do we have with our students, and then thinking about how we use that time in terms of what our students need, and not necessarily in terms of the academic side. Our reading levels are low, or our math standards mastery shows deficits here and there, so let's increase those blocks or instructional times to 2 hours a day or 150 minutes a day. No. What we did was we looked at what the data said in terms of what our students and teachers could handle, especially coming out of virtual learning.
Greg, I think you've muted yourself inadvertently. So if you unmute again, don't want to miss a word you're saying. There you go.
So again, going back to, not just looking at the academic side of the schedule and increasing blocks, based on needs. No, rather we looked at what the data said in terms of what our students and teachers could handle, especially coming out of the virtual learning and pandemic. Where do we address social emotional needs of our students throughout the day? how do we assess and build stamina back up for all stakeholders? And what times of the day are most conducive to X content area block? And then really, when does everyone just need a break in the day to breathe or have an opportunity to engage in reflection or discussion about what you need or where you are? That certainly can include academics, but also looking at all the needs of stakeholders. So, what we did is we engaged our teachers and some of our students in a discussion activity around what they thought they needed from a schedule this year that is both manageable and effective. So we put them in grade level and content specific groups. We assigned a member of our behavioral health and student support team to each group and really had them create a schedule draft. We then, as a leadership team, took those drafts and used them to influence, what ended up being our master schedule this year, including a daily social emotional block with age appropriate and developmentally appropriate, varied activities. So, we're now seeing a positive impact on our academic growth as well as our overall school culture and discipline data. Now, was it the only contributing factor? No, but going back to my response to the previous question, if we're using our time with students and staff based on addressing the needs that we see both in practice and in the data, then our students and staff are more prepared, supported, and able to navigate the time and spaces outside of our locus of control. So yes, scheduling was a big decision. We felt addressed some of our survey findings because for both students and staff, as evidenced in the data, when you feel comfortable, when you feel supported and not overwhelmed by a singularly focused or overstuffed or jam-packed schedule, everyone can find the time to do more things well, and balance all the plates that we're all spinning, from 7:30 to 3:30 every day and from late August to early June. So, we really looked at the time we had with our students and how to create a schedule that was conducive to those things.
So, such incredible insights from the three of you. I know we all really appreciate hearing that. We're at about 1:45, and so we have 15 minutes before the end. A couple of things just to remind our audience is, feel free to add any questions into the chat. And then we're going to ask a question that we also want those of you who are listening to feel free to include your responses also. I think many of you are really doing exceptional things in your own schools, in your own spaces. And part of this is really hearing from each other and learning about that. I just want to underscore something that I've heard kind of as a thread across the three of you, the three featured schools that are doing wonderful things, is that the idea to kind of underscore what Gregory just talked about, that creativity and persistence and all of that, it does require a sense of mental space. Like, you have to give people some space to be able to kind of tap into those things, as well as the fact that it also supports well-being and and kind of is the antithesis of sort of this sense of overwhelm. Let's jam everything in there. And when you do that, and you also allow your stakeholders, this is your, these are your key folks, this is your students, these are your educators, this is your staff, to tell you their suggestions, their ideas from their vantage point of the things that will work and the ideas and solutions they want to bring forward. You are going to have not only better, more creative ideas, you're going to automatically have more buy-in because they were a part of the solution making and they see the leadership, respecting, their ideas, their solutions. And all of you sort of spoke a little bit to that and how you had them, that their feedback really be a part of you're moving forward in such positive ways. And so I just really want to applaud you all for that, and really seeing the value and respecting sort of the talent that already exists within your school communities and utilizing that. So our sort of last question that we're really opening up, and again, there's so much more we can learn from each other, but this has been really insightful. Kind of, what are some of the things that your team, has done to improve well-being? Are there other things, are there strategies that, as we said before, were attempted and you found yourself needing to pivot? What, in addition to what was already shared, and I'd even love the panel to share, for other leaders and leaders very inclusively, meaning I subscribe to we are all learners and leaders in our own rights, right? So as leaders in the spaces that we occupy, what would you advise of others in terms of even embarking on well-being and how to integrate that into the many things you have to be responsible for and accountable for? Would love to kind of hear from you all. I do see that Dr. Fraser O'Leary has his hand up. I'm not sure if we have the ability to unmute, but certainly want to encourage you to put it in the chat. Although I will turn to Preeti and just ask her to chime in if we can have folks unmute.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
We do hear you. Yes.
I just wanted to thank everyone for your comments. And I had two questions. One of them was, although maybe it's not a question, I noticed that principals weren't surveyed. And judging from my travels in Ward 4, especially to the public schools, that the answers that were given by the students and the teachers would not be a whole lot different than they would have been from their principals. Although I think there's an exponential amount of stress on the school leaders, something that I, as a teacher for 47 years, didn't really appreciate that much until I started the last 3 years on the State Board of Education and going into the schools and listening to all of the school leaders, especially during the pandemic. It's just been unbelievable stress. And it's been great. What I would like as a request is that you send this video, or whatever you want to call it, the recording, to the education leaders in the city. That's
excellent point. And I think we do plan to share this. We don't want to keep any of these insights and strategies secret. And, just within this conversation, it is too valuable. You make such a great point too. It's something that our center has also been very concerned about, is that, again, the stressors can be different, particular to our specific roles, whether as roles as caregivers, a role as educator, a role as a leader leading other professionals like a principal, an LEA lead. I mean, they have some common challenges, but there also are some distinctions. And I would love to hear if folks feel comfortable from our panel, given, you took your time to be here. That was not a small thing for you to participate and plan and pull together remarks and talk to your teams to share some of these things in spite of, or despite the fact that you have many other demands on your time. What has helped you with your own ability to be present as leader? Would any of you be willing to unmute and talk about that?
Sure.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Gregory.
Like I said before, relationships are the linchpin to successful schools. And there's a certain level of stress as a school leader that you can't ever really unload or dissipate to some degree, but there's varying levels. And so for me, it's really the people you surround yourself with, the support team that you build around you, the other leaders. For me, my leadership team at Blow Pierce is phenomenal. We're all on the same page, we're walking in lockstep, but also, we're critical friends to make sure that we're continuing to push each other. And same with the teachers. I think Olga touched on it a little bit in terms of time. When you give people the space and the opportunity to really shine and come through, that alleviates a lot of stress on things that you have to micromanage as a leader. There's still coaching and support that needs to happen, but when you can step into that space of a teacher or a coach or support as opposed to a micromanager, it really helps alleviate some of the stress. Not all of it, of course, every day, but it really helps alleviate some of that stress that comes as a school leader, especially now.
Such a great point. I have a resource that I'll make sure to ask Empower K-12 partners to share, which is just some of the research that is shown around teacher well-being. And there isn't very much, honestly. There's not a lot of research on principal well-being. It's something that I think is a gap in the field, but beyond what we know from practice-based evidence, right, which what you're talking about. But one of the things that educator teachers say is that when their administrators and their leaders trust them and demonstrate that they trust their ability to get it done, that conveys a great amount of respect, and it actually counters their sense of stress and demoralization. And just so it's very much, I think, in line with what you're saying, Gregory. Sarah and Brandy, did you want to add anything?
No, what I will just kind of piggyback off of what Gregory shared, I believe that you build a team so strong that no one knows who the leader is, right? And I tell folks when I am making hiring decisions, I'm not hiring teachers. I'm not hiring interventionists. I'm hiring leaders. I'm hiring school leaders. Everyone is a leader in their own right. And what I understand and realize about adults and the students is that everyone wants to feel empowered and engaged. And that is the approach that you have to take. And I know that my team, they really rely on me to be a visionary and allow them to get to work. And so that is, kind of the lens that I look out from when I'm trying to manage what's happening in the building, articulate and communicate, being very transparent and showing that I have this ability to be an equity kind of oriented leader. And I think that's just very important. I think the only advice that I would give anyone is to really take a deep dive into non-traditional opportunities to learn. I think that's very important, and encourage safe peer interactions, just kind of remove this barrier that, we can't do anything or you can't be around people. It's how. It's not really the why, it's the how. And I think it's important to stress that to all stakeholders. One thing that we walked away with was an amazing new podcast from our middle school team, giving them the space to be innovative, talk about some of the subjects in ELA, mathematics, science, and so forth. We even connected with, external folks to support it. Real Carter, who is Jay-Z's nephew, he came down from New York. He taught a class for about 9 weeks with them to show them how to use the equipment, how to be engaged, how to, create your own music so that you're not having copyright infringement issues. And I think it's important for me to kind of do that type of legwork to engage folks outside of the community so that kids can still learn, feel excited about coming to school and being able to share and articulate it with their peers and other folks in the community.
I love that. I definitely want to hear from Sarah, but just to underscore something you said, Brandy, because again, I'm so excited about everything you're sharing. And is it another thing that's very consistent with the little bit of research we do have is that transparency and bidirectional communication is, again, so essential to relationship building. When other people understand why, as leaders or in our roles, we're making the decisions we're making, even if it's counter to what they would prefer to see, they are much more willing to be a part of the team to support that decision because they understand what has gone into why that has to happen. And that's part of, again, being willing to share sometimes when we don't know certain things. And again, it's a matter of trust building, and that transparency really does go a long way. And so thank you for sharing that. Sarah, anything else you'd like to add?
Just very briefly, to just jump on what actually all of you have talked about, which is that trust, showing that trust, and doing that in very concrete ways. I think, we've learned so much in the past few years about being flexible and doing things differently. And one of the things that some of our teachers asked for in the beginning of this year was just much more flexibility around planning times. And in the past, before COVID, of course, all of our planning took place, not all of it, because of course teachers are always working at home, but a lot of our planning took place during school hours in the school building. And then everybody was home, and so all of our planning took place over Zoom and at home and remotely and all of that. And then we came back into the building, and we thought that our early release day, which is Friday at 1 o'clock, we thought that those afternoons would all take place in the building again. But what our teachers told us was that they really needed, for their well-being and balance, they needed some of that time to be able to be more flexible as well. And I think by taking that leap and saying, you know, we do trust you, of course, you're extremely hardworking. And so we need to show that by saying, we don't need to be physically present, you know, together necessarily. There is benefit to that. And I think we've seen that there needs to be a little bit of that balance. And Brandy, I really like what you were saying too about encouraging people to get together and taking away some of the fear as well. And I think that's also been really important within our teams. But definitely as well, like really giving agency to our teachers, just like we try to our students. And that has had a huge effect of just, I think, people feeling more trusted and more, and I like what you had to say, Olga, about like then having the creativity because they have the space and the balance within their lives.
Right. Again, so we wish we could go on and on. I'm sorry, Gregory, go ahead. You have the last.
I know, I'm sorry we're up against it. And I just one
okay.
last quick comment.
Yes.
I think the most important thing too, and I have to remind myself this and sometimes my staff, we get to work with kids all day. You know, as an elementary and middle school leader, like we're working with children every day. I mean, what can be better than that? And if you can't find a classroom or a space or somebody in your building when you're working with kids that can kind of make that stress kind of melt away on a daily basis when you get into those moments, then, you know, it just, that's for me,
could
that's
be telling. Yeah. Very good reminder. And love the idea of the importance of joy and laughter and space, right? That we really kind of, so I just want to thank you so much, the three of you and everyone who's participated. Again, just to kind of remind us what we're here to talk about today as we're sort of closing out is how this investment in the use of data and in information that we're gathering systematically and regularly has really informed really good practices. And it's this data-driven decision-making that, again, are best practices in, you know, running schools and in school behavioral health in particular, and that we don't need to be scared of the use of data to kind of really improve our efforts. So again, just want to humbled and thankful for everyone's participation. And I'll now turn it to Preeti, who will close us out.
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you all for joining. Thank you to the panelists and Olga for doing a fantastic job facilitating and kind of helping us learn more about the different strategies. Just wanted to kind of remind folks to keep an eye out for a summary brief in your inbox later this month, and that we will be opening our winter survey starting February 2022. And to encourage you to kind of follow us on social media and kind of connect with us to follow our work. All right, well, thank you.
Thank you. And yes, and hopefully we'll compile these things and be able to share them with everybody together so you can